Hello, welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for November 15th, 2012. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. Welcome, and joining us on the program today, we have Patrick McCanna, Stan Nurilov, John Hogoboom, and thanks, guys, for joining us today. I'm Brian Rexroad, and let's go ahead and start talking about our first topic here today. We have several, I think, very interesting topics to talk about. First one is from the United States China Economic Security Review Commission. And, John, what can you tell us about, I guess there's a report coming out pretty soon, is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Brian. So there's been a lot of talk, and actually I'm very encouraged by a few things in here, in that at least this is getting more attention than it has been. We've been talking about APT in general, a lot of it being state-sponsored type activity, a lot of it from China, and that's what this Congressional panel has. They're publishing a report on their findings about the cyber espionage type activity that China's been conducting against companies in the U.S. This report seems to kind of focus a little bit more on the military aspect and the defense industrial base type activity that they've been engaging in, but we know that they're also interested in just regular businesses and companies to get strategic intelligence out of those that they can use and leverage in, their companies domestically in China. So the report's not out yet. It was supposed to be out yesterday. I haven't been able to find it online, but it's good that they're talking about it at least at a congressional level. I know topic was kind of touched on as well during the presidential debates, but probably not as much as I would have liked. One of the other things that popped up just yesterday or today, I think it was, is that President Obama signed a secret to classified piece of presidential policy. It's called Presidential Policy Directive 20, that is going to enable the military to act more aggressively to frustrate these types of adversaries that are penetrating either military networks or commercial, domestic commercial networks in order to gain this type of strategic intelligence. The thing that was really encouraging to me at the bottom here of the article, and I kind of highlighted, is that the directive comes at a time when Obama is considering issuing an executive order that in part would direct the government to work with the private sector to develop cybersecurity best practices that the owners of the nation's critical infrastructure could adopt voluntarily. That's really encouraging to me. Right now, or for the past year and a half or so, this stuff's been going on, but government and the private sector have not been playing very well together because there's a lot of things that become classified and they can't share information with each other. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping that this will at least kind of open the door to kind of share best practices, procedures, methods that the government and defense contractors are using to protect themselves with the private sector so that they can better help defend themselves as well. We know we've been doing some of this for ourselves and customers and whatnot, and so hopefully they reach out to us as well because we are part of that critical infrastructure aspect. So.
Yeah, very good, John. I think I would agree, and certainly with all the points that you've made there. And, just as an example, I think, first of all, we certainly see a lot of attack activity where data is being stolen. I think where we probably are not able to make a full conclusion is attribution to the originating organization. Right. So I think having this congressional panel provide some, presumably with additional insights that we wouldn't have, associated with particular activities, and certainly coming from a congressional panel that's associated with our economic relationships. And as you pointed out, there are a lot of other companies that are being targeted. And I think one example, I can't really attribute to a specific organization, but one example where we had seen some data theft recently, simply the day before of the event, there was an issue of many billions of dollars worth of bonds. And you can only, we don't know exactly what information had been stolen in that case, but that may have been, in fact, prospecting the opportunity for some insider trading type activities that may have been the objective of that attack. So these are the kind of things that I think are perhaps missed, at least in what has been publicized so far, is that, as you'd mentioned, it appears they're targeting, or they talked about targeting military organizations, information technology, but there are certainly other avenues that would be that appear to be taken advantage of in these attacks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the other slides I have here, and this is very basic stuff, because to go into the whole gamut of things that I would recommend people do. So if you're worried that you're not currently really aware of this, and you think maybe you want to check your own networks to see if you have any kind of advanced persistent threat type activity going on. Not that this is going to help you tremendously, because there's not specific signatures that I'm going to mention here. But there's some things that we recommend to our customers that they do. Notably, audit all your DNS activity. And if you don't have that capability, make sure that you implement that capability, because they use DNS a lot to communicate to the back-end command and controls. And you can use that to find, not only when you found one person who's infected, but you can typically go back to the DNS activity and find additional people. Mm-hmm. Set up the capabilities to sinkhole activity, either by DNS or by IP, so that when they look up a DNS name, you can sinkhole it to an IP address inside your company, and instead of going to the real place, your compromised machines inside will go to the sinkhole. This is a real big one. Look for anomalous protocols where they shouldn't be. Can't really define to you exactly how you might implement that in your own enterprise, but look for things that non-HTTP activity in port 80 or non-HTTPS in port 443. That's typically a lot of, they tend to ride over those protocols, or those ports rather, but use other protocols besides HTTP or HTTPS. That's not always true, but in a lot of cases it is. So if you have the capability to look for that, do that. Audit all your VPN logs to look for anomalous things. You know, so-and-so logs in from New Jersey on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but then all of a sudden on Thursday they log in from China. That might be a problem. If you have the capability to audit net uses to your workstations, and where that net use is done with administrator privileges, there's actually a special code for that. I forget what the Windows event code is for it. That might be something that you'd want to be aware of, because once they get onto a machine, they'll start to move laterally to other machines using that technique. And then lastly, when you're going to communicate about remediation efforts, if you're working on, you know you've got some infected hosts inside the company, and your IT team is talking about how to engage or work this problem, do so over encrypted email or other methods, because we know one of the first things adversaries do is they try to get in and they try to get access to your email infrastructure as well, so that they can monitor all the email that's going on, usually for specific individuals that they're interested in. But you might be one of those individuals, or your IT team might be. Mm-hmm. So.
All right, very good. Thanks, John.
That's all I had there.
Yeah, obviously a lot of good advice there, and no simple undertaking. Any one of those takes a reasonable amount of activity, but probably will pay off in the end. And with that, I guess, Stan, it sounds like there's been some other discussions on some different countries being targeted here. Do you have something to discuss with us in that area?
Yes. Actually, this company, Norman, posted on their blog about some cyberattacks that they noted were targeted against Israeli and Palestinian targets. And they didn't try to say who it was, but from the meta-information that was kind of included in the report, I didn't think it was China, although some of the similar techniques were being used. And it's actually interesting to know that other countries are being targeted besides the U.S. You know, we all think that only the U.S. is being targeted, or our critical infrastructure, but it looks like other countries are also being targeted as well. Yeah. So with that, I just wanted to highlight some of the interesting things that they disclosed in their blog. One of which is that basically the way the APT propagated or seemed to propagate is through malicious email attachments, and inside were documents which were actually, I think, like zipped files that included both a document and an executable. So they were self-extracting, and the way it was interesting to me the way they started with their investigation. Obviously, they said that they read something online about Israelis' computers being targeted, and somehow they were able to get their hands on a sample. And from that sample, they found a certificate, a fake Microsoft SSL certificate that was being used to sign some of the documents and executables that were being sent. And using that certificate, they had a way, I guess they've been tracking different malware threats, they had a way to link that up with other things that they had seen in the past. And what they were able to uncover is additional documents over a period of about a year that targeted the Israeli. Well, it looked like they targeted the Israelis because the documents had text that would be of interest to people from that region. It looked like it was in that language, in Hebrew. And they were able to take a look at all those malware samples that were related to the certificate and find a list of dynamic DNS domains, which we've seen in the past with different APT actors as well. And then from those, they were actually able to go even further back in time. So at first it had seemed like only Israel had been targeted by this group. But by looking back even further in time and using these indicators, these dynamic DNS names and things like that, they found additional documents that looked like they were in Arabic this time, and they actually looked like they were targeting the Palestinian region. So they were able to, with the databases that they have access to, I guess, uncover a whole set of these activities going back about a year for the different IP addresses, different domain names, and all related to this one group. One more interesting thing that they were able to do is that some of these documents that were distributed, and this is actually goes back to, if you're an attacker, there's a chance you're leaving some breadcrumbs behind. Well, the breadcrumbs that were left behind by these guys, and we don't know, since this is APT, this could be intentional for deception or it could be accidental. What happened is the author, anytime you create a document on your computer, the username of the author, who registered that program, it's embedded automatically in the document file. And then there's additional things. So the document might be created by one person but saved by another. That type of meta information, including the date of creation and date of modification, is stored not only on the file system but inside the file as well. So they had uncovered some interesting names, that may lead you to believe, who the actors might be, or what their kind of political background is. Not political, but maybe which nation state they're associated with. And they extracted these, and it looked like there were several individuals that were collaborating over this time to try to get in and use, exploit the targets. So it's a very interesting read. I recommend that you go through the PDF that they have on their website. It also lists some dynamic DNS names that were being used, and the company Norman, they state that some of the domain names are still active, so you should consider blocking these on your network.
Yeah. Very good, Stan. And that is a very good article, and you point out many of the things that you want to be looking for these types of attacks. You mentioned certainly the dynamic DNS, and pointing to the first recommendation that John had mentioned earlier about at least auditing DNS and also providing a sinkhole capability along the lines of what you just recommended as well. So very, very interesting information there. And as you suggested, this may not be associated with China. There are other organizations that are doing these types of activities as well. So we shouldn't be jumping to conclusions along those lines either.
The two key things for me out of that was that, number one, it was probably a team working, more than one person, which is very typical of what we've seen in the past. Mm-hmm. And the second is that when they finally found it, by digging a little bit deeper, they found that it had been going on for a long time, and at least a year. And that's also typical of what victims have been finding as well. Once they do uncover it, they realize, oh, my God, this has been going on for a while. And how long has it been going on?
Right. Hence the persistence aspect of this, absolutely. And some really, I mean, we refer to advanced persistent threats. This is what I would certainly describe as some advanced and persistent investigation into that threat. Very good investigation there. So, Stan, you had mentioned some abuse of SSL certificates. I don't think this topic is directly related to that, but Patrick, I think you had some information to share with us here related to how SSL can maybe fall short of its objective. Is that right?
Yeah, I thought instead of taking the glamorous approach and talking about attacks, I'd take a little time to talk about defense today, and specifically about two papers that came out last month that I think are incredible resources. And I would sure like people to get an opportunity to go to review them. Depending on what your role is and your responsibility, I'm sure at some point you are aware of SSL and TLS. SSL, Secure Sockets Layer, and TLS, Transport Layer Security. And they're the fundamental encryption transport mechanisms that are used for web applications. And in fact, there are plenty of libraries out there. So if you roll a desktop application, a server application, or a mobile application, you have the ability to use lots of different libraries to do encrypted transport. And in the security world, there's kind of two axioms that have been out there all along. One, you never roll your own crypto. And two, you rely on the security libraries that are already out there to make sure that you're properly protecting your data. But over the last couple of years, we've seen that SSL is getting misimplemented all over the place. And so these two white papers that came out, they provide details on how to mistakenly implement SSL and how to properly implement SSL. So, for starters, I want to reference this paper that came out. Dan Bonet from Stanford University, he is, I don't know if I would say the lead, but he's the academic guide for the researchers that disclosed this paper, called The Most Dangerous Code in the World, Validating SSL Certificates in Non-Browser Software. And this white paper, it goes through an audit of, I think, 20 or 30 different applications and how they implemented SSL and identified problems with their implementation that basically create complete man-in-the-middle scenarios for those implementations. There's a lot of surprising applications out there that misimplement the various libraries that are out there. And so I'll talk a lot about this paper, just kind of to give you an example of the kind of mistakes that can be made, because sometimes I think people misunderstand or misunderestimate how easy it is to improperly implement SSL, even if you're using the right libraries. And then the next paper, the team at ISAC Partners, they came out with a paper on proper implementation of OpenSSL. Everything you always wanted to know about certificate validation with OpenSSL, but we're afraid to ask. And so, while the Dangerous Code in the World paper is a nice example of how to mistakenly implement it, this OpenSSL paper is a very nice laser perspective on one particular SSL library and how to properly implement it. And so that might be useful for teams that are very aware of the kinds of mistakes that can be made and want to focus on OpenSSL as their implementation library. So you might say, all right, certificate authorities, and transport encryption, what are the kinds of mistakes that can be made? And so in this white paper, one of the examples I think is the most readable even for non-coders they use is the Amazon Flexible Payment Service API. And there's some PHP code here that I've got referenced that comes right from their white paper that they call out as examples of bad code. And so this code is using the libcurl library, which is a nice URL webget type of technology that can be used to grab different content. And we've got the set-op function called twice, one with the SSL verify peer function enabled and one with the verify host function enabled. And you can see what it's what this code is doing is, if you're reading it, you might think, all right, this is saying I want to verify peer because the value is set to true, and I want to verify the host because the value is set to true. But it turns out that the curl setup libraries are not written this way. In fact, setting the value to true is not consistent with the default, which the value is 2. And in PHP, when you use the value true, that turns into the value 1. And so surprisingly, this ends up turning off functionality for verifying the host name of a particular SSL session. And this results in scenarios where you may be using this API to authenticate a host and thinking that the common name that you're validating is properly being validated, but in the end it ends up not actually being validated at all. It just says, is a common name existent in the session. And so anybody can inject a common name in there, and then you could possibly be man-in-the-middling that session. So that's one example, and the kinds of mistakes that are out there are numerous, and many of them are just these kind of subtle API implementation errors where maybe there was a mistake in reading the API documentation, or possibly it was return statements that are set before the actual certificate validation happens. It really runs the gamut, and there's a lot of lessons to be drawn here. And I think the first starting lesson is that you can't just rely on validating that an application uses SSL. It has to be implemented properly. I think for years we've always said SSL is the transport encrypted. That's enough. We can move on to other security problems. But it's turned out with lots of different research that's come out that's really insufficient. You actually need to go through and do manual code analysis to validate that the SSL implementations are correct. Mm-hmm. One of the common gotchas for application developers is disabling certificate validation while you're doing testing of your application. And going down that road, even from day 0 of your code development, is really a prescription for pain. You should start from the perspective of ensuring your application validates certificates, because too often developers accidentally leave in test code in their production code, and it results in situations where there's a valid SSL session and the session is being encrypted, but you don't properly authenticate the host. And so all of that effort that you put into trying to keep the content secret from unexpected third parties completely goes to waste. Mm-hmm. Fourth lesson. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, how many times have we seen vulnerabilities being introduced because the debug feature was left on in the code?
Right.
I'm just shocked that happens so frequently with SSL libraries. Just the amount of extra effort that you go into to properly encrypt your transport and then accidentally shoot yourself in the foot. That's just such a bummer.
Yeah, bummer is the right way to describe it, I think, yes.
Another interesting lesson, so in the most dangerous code in the world white paper, they go through a lot of different payment APIs. And some of the payment APIs that are out there, their defaults are not secure, at least at the time of the review by the researchers. And so, a big lesson here is do not just cut and paste code for properly implementing SSL. Evaluate what the settings are that you're using, and evaluate whether or not they're appropriate for what your needs are. And then the last lesson here is that many of the SSL libraries that are out there have a usability problem. Usually we think about usability in terms of like end user experience, but in this case it's usability for developers. We've got a lot of libraries with functions that are descriptive and settings that you would think have certain meanings. And unless you've really inspected the API documentation, you make these kinds of does true equal to kinds of mistakes. So make sure your team or you individually are properly putting in the effort to reading your documentation and properly implementing the APIs. So that's at a high level. Defense is no longer sufficient at saying, are we using SSL? Put some extra effort in. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of automated tools out there for reviewing whether or not you're doing this. You may need to put in extra effort to actually analyze the code.
Well, that was going to be my next question here, Patrick, and perhaps you've already answered it, but I was wondering if there were any regression test libraries. It seems like there'd be something that could be done to help verify that the SSL is actually working as a part of an application. So to sort of dummy out that part of the server interaction, check to see if an invalid certificate is accepted, and check to see if particular settings are properly rejected by the applications. Are you aware of anything like that?
So there's a few tools that are out there that are used for this kind of testing. There's SSL Strip, which is a proof of concept tool written to specifically break SSL sessions that use a certain set of mistakes. Mm-hmm. There's another tool called MITM, Man-in-the-Middle Proxy. There's a pay-for-play tool called Burp Suite that allows you to do some of this kinds of inspection. So there are tools out there, but there's nothing that's really comprehensive. And the quality of your testing is dependent on the caliber of the person that's running the tools. There's not really a button that you can push that does the entire gamut of misconfigurations for SSL. You really need to have someone who can sit down, analyze the different applications, and properly inspect the tools. Mm-hmm. So there are tools that are out there. The researchers have specifically called out a lack of black box tools for doing this kind of testing as a problem and an opportunity for future research. I anticipate that there are some hungry security professionals out there that are trying to develop a tool that they can make lots of money on, because this problem is so, it seems to be such a repeated problem all over the place. So I think over time we'll start to see some other tools. And I don't know, maybe some of the other guys here, are you aware of any other tools that are worth referencing?
Well, you certainly covered many more than I was particularly aware of. And I think those actually some very good points that you're making here. So thank you very much for that. In fact, I think it sort of exemplifies a soapbox that I've been on lately. That is, all too often folks are looking for, it's been, traditionally called that silver bullet, that quick and easy security solution. And my response to that has typically been that really security is a practice in details. And there are really kind of two flavors of details that I think we're working on. One is what I call granularity. That is, controlling whether users have access to a system is basically a 1-0 kind of, question or problem to solve. That's relatively easy. But as soon as they get access within a system, controlling who has access to what becomes a management of details and what level of granularity that you want to really manage. And then the other part, which I think you've emphasized here, Patrick, is is what I would call the quality detail. That is, doing things properly and managing the details and doing it properly are really the key to having a good security solution. It's not good enough to say that you have SSL implemented. You have to have SSL implemented properly, and there are a lot of nuances that need to be considered in that process.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would add is, smart security professionals like us are just incredibly rare and hard to come by. Very valuable, completely underpaid, and these kinds of problems are just not solvable unless you got a really highly talented, high-caliber team. So make sure to give your security professional a big hug.
Yeah, I don't remember the last time I got a hug from my manager.
The next time I see you, I'll give you a big one.
Okay, thanks. So with that, let's and thank you again, Patrick. And with that, let's go back to Stan here. And Stan, I understand you know a little bit about the Russian underground. Can you tell us a little more?
Well, of course. I recently came across a paper by Trend Micro that examines some of the tactics used by the malware. I wouldn't even say malware. I would say the crime families, or so to speak, of the Russian hacking community. So with all the APT stuff that we're always talking about, we sometimes forget to go back to just the standard run-of-the-mill malware, and it's become a big problem recently. And so this report, it kind of tries to look at the monetization aspect of all of that malware and botnets, and we've seen stuff like that. But what I like about this report, and I recommend everybody read it, the PDF is available online, it kind of breaks down into dollars and cents some of the tools that are being sold, some of the capabilities that are being sold to the underground. So I pulled out a few interesting ones that I think. Let me go through some of the services that are covered in this paper. So one of the things that is used or by the hackers, I guess, is during their hacking is they need a machine to run their malware on or something like that, or to start their attack from. So something that's very much in high demand is like VPN services. And apparently they're being offered for as low as $1 a day out there, and they will encrypt your access to some hosts, and they will, prevent potentially some of the anonymity. Once again, they will give you some possible anonymity, at least part of the way through your attack. The other stuff that people look for is dedicated servers where your malware can run. These are also in high demand, and these are measured in the underground by at least 3 attributes. So like the power, the amount of bandwidth that's available to the dedicated server, the lifetime, how long will that dedicated server stay alive for your malicious purpose, or will it get taken down? And that goes back to bulletproof hosting, which is something we've heard about. Certain ISPs or certain ASNs we've seen are less likely to take down malicious websites. So that's something that is measured in the underground and is advertised or marketed. And, obviously you would pay a higher price for using a server that has that capability of being bulletproof or having a longer lifetime. Other things that are offered are proxy servers, SOC servers, and these could be offered in either just, giving you the opportunity to log into them, or software agents that you can install on your own botnet that would take your botnet and convert that into a proxy for you or a VPN connection for you. Some other things that are called out in this paper is that there's actually a lot of programming services being offered. So programming for malicious utilities, programming for agents that can attack, or reselling common rootkits or bot kits, one of which is called out specifically Zeus. We're all aware of that one. And several others are called out in the paper as well. And so they list some of the prices for some of these things that I thought were very interesting. One thing that we see, I would say a lot of it through our network analysis, is these kind of traffic generation and possibly related to black hat search engine optimization techniques. When you're able to somehow direct some stream of users from legitimate pages that they're visiting to illegitimate pages where something can happen to them. So that redirection of users, or a set of users, is actually sold as a service. So they're out there, and you could buy, for example, in one posting that they reference, 50,000 users a day to come to wherever you would want them to for $9 a day. You can also buy Twitter followers or Facebook likes. So I found it interesting that for $35 you could have 1,000 Twitter followers. For $140 you could have 1,000 Facebook likes. So if you want to be really popular and show all your friends, I guess, that you're really popular, you could have that many, for just $140, you could become that popular person that always has their comments liked. I gather, though, that these are probably used to like malicious links or something that would take you somewhere else to do something additional malicious things. You could pay for YouTube visits, for MySpace visits, things like that. Other things that are called out are ransomware services, So you're probably familiar with programs, and we saw a rash of these maybe a few years ago, where a software program would get installed on your computer, and it would block you from being able to use your computer. It would show something embarrassing, and you would have to text the code or send payment to somewhere to get the unlock code for your malware. It's kind of, in a way, similar to other fake antivirus things. And all of these, either the software to do it or the ability of them to launch campaigns that would do this for you, that's all available as a service to be bought. The one thing that I also noted in this report, Trend Micro, they call out what they think is available for sale is basically components. Components that would let you build the attack. So if you want to build up a botnet, you need people to visit some malicious website. So you could do that by buying the traffic generation service. You would need the botnet software, so you could get that by buying your hacking services or buying your rootkit service or Trojan rootkit. And you could create and customize your own. You can buy another service that would encrypt your malicious binary, so it's unique to you, so it would take longer to detect by antivirus companies. You could buy a service that would go ahead and check your binary to make sure it's not detected by any of the antivirus companies. So all of these things have a price that would allow a somewhat novice person, so somebody who may have very bad ideas but less technical knowledge, to be able to actually play in this field. So I think it's very interesting. It's available out there, and I definitely recommend others to go ahead and take a look at it. Definitely shows some of these monetization techniques pretty well.
Yeah, this is sobering, to say the least. I think what it really kind of the way I interpret this is it's that step beyond the script kiddies. That is, you don't even really have to be a programmer anymore, or even running the programs. You can almost piece together a number of services that even have service-level agreements that you'd be able to use for malicious activity.
Yeah, it's malware as a service.
Malware as a service. So, yeah, that very. I think that was a very good article to bring to light here, Stan, because I think it really kind of puts into perspective the level of threats here, and kind of, at the risk of sweeping generalizations, it provides a sort of a good contrast between one set of activities or types of activities that we've typically been concerned about, and other sets of activities we talked about in other parts of this program, the advanced persistent threats. And they do have different profiles associated with them, and neither one is exclusive of the other. Both of them have, in the end, some type of an economic or monetary objective behind them, and have different types of sophistication associated with those, but certainly in the end are ones that we need to be paying attention to.
I think one more thing that is important to bring up is that some of these services are enabled by botnets. So the bad guys are offering these things, but they're not actually, they're not hosting this on something of their own. All of this is running through some botnet, or some of this stuff at least is running through their botnet. And if you or your computer or computers in your enterprise are part of this botnet, you're actually helping this activity to occur, and there might be some liabilities there. So definitely all the malware infections and things like that should be taken seriously.
Right, absolutely. Very good, Stan. Thank you. Okay, and with that, I'd like to make a quick mention here. There was an article that I happened to come across that I thought would be of interest to the audience here today, and this relates to actually an article that was posted, and this is from the CTO of Norse Corp. I'm not sure I can pronounce his last name correctly here. It's Tommy Stanson. And basically, he had referred to a case where he was aware of at least 10,000 hacked DVRs in the United States alone that are basically participating in a botnet or used for malicious purposes here. And that actually kind of struck a nerve with me. Now, as I investigated this further, it appeared that what he was referring to are literally the DVRs that we typically have in our homes. In the story he was discussing, it was actually one that was used in a bank and effectively provided a gateway, or at least it appeared, into the bank, or at least was creating malicious traffic associated with that was attributable to the bank's address. Now, as you know, we've been reporting since early summer a botnet that was created on using security surveillance DVRs, security surveillance camera DVRs. These two don't appear to be related, but I thought it was very interesting that whereas we were talking about security surveillance camera DVRs, it appears that your conventional residential DVRs are potentially targets of attack as well. So I think it generally fits into that category of embedded software systems that have not taken the full set of protection measures that are needed for a platform that is, in fact, a software platform that could be used for malicious purposes. So,
Brian, do you know what the underlying operating system for these platforms were?
I don't know specifically for this case that was referred to in this article, but in the many cases that we have seen, they are basically an embedded Linux operating system. So they're running on MIPS processors, which is a popular platform for many of the home routers, even small business routers, and other types of embedded software platforms.
Yeah, the thing I've been thinking about a lot is I've been doing a lot of work on machine-to-machine projects. And this idea about compromising, little Internet of Things types of smart devices and using them in a botnet comes up a lot. And my basic prejudice is I think it makes a lot of sense to be concerned about that for these embedded Linux implementations. But when you get into some of these like customizable microcontroller type of environments where you kind of have a loose C implementation and maybe you do have networking, but being concerned about these resources as being something that would be used in a botnet seems like a stretch to me, given how limited the functionality of these different devices. But I have this discussion with a lot of people, and they have very different opinions on the topic.
Well, yeah, and I think you have a valid point here. That is, generally speaking, I would call the attack activity that we've seen so far in this category, that is targeting embedded software systems, is what I would describe as on the low end of the sophistication. Most of the cases, it's they have management ports open on port 23, Telnet. It's just simply guessing passwords, and oftentimes it's the default password for getting access to the devices. And since it is a general Linux operating system operating on there, they have the opportunity to use typical tools that are already installed on the platform or add their own tools. And so that's part of what has made this successful. In the scenario that you're talking about, where there's very limited functionality, hopefully some limited memory associated with it, limited capabilities in terms of a file system that you can be able to use to manipulate the platform, it certainly would be much more difficult to compromise those devices. But it's something that needs to be deliberately considered in the design of the platform. It's not going to happen by accident.
Yeah, I think you're the only person that's happy about the limited memory and processing resources of these devices. These poor developers, they look very tired trying to make things work.
Well, I didn't say I was happy. I was just saying that it's hard.
You're the only one hoping for it.
We've got to stay a little bit optimistic here.
Yeah.
So with that, let's take a quick look at the Internet Weather Report for the week. And we've just a couple of things. I would describe this as a relatively quiet week. We haven't had any what I would describe as unusually large denial of service attacks taking place. We haven't had any what I would describe as really aggressive reconnaissance activity taking place either. There certainly are things that don't show up in the weather report, but show up in a more subtle sense. But with that, one of the ports that did show up on the radar here today is port 3390 TCP. We saw basically a single source. There are actually a couple of sources that were scanning on this port, but one that was generating most of the activity was from Germany. And I dug around a little bit trying to determine why this particular port might be targeted, and I happened to come across an article from Microsoft that was providing a recommendation on how to provide remote desktop connections from outside of your home network. And in particular, one of the things that we often report on is port 3389 TCP, which is the default port for remote desktop protocol. And in this article, what they said is that, if you want to provide remote access to more than one computer on your home network, well, just map that port, what would typically be port 3389 to port 3390 or port 3391, and extend that out through your router. So I'm conjecturing a little bit here, but I suspect that what the scanning might be about was looking for perhaps users that have taken a look at that article and remapped remote desktop protocol to 3390. And as you know, like I had mentioned earlier, port 3389 is heavily targeted, and this looks like some prospecting scanning activity here. So we might see some increases in this in time, and we'll be sure to report that to you if we do. The second one that showed up, we've seen this a number of times in the last several weeks, increase in flows on source port 53 UDP, that's DNS. And in this particular case, a little bit of analysis showed that this is probably related to DNS amplification attacks. There certainly have been some increasing trends in using DNS for amplification attacks, denial of service attacks using DNS. And in fact, there was also a recent article that came out, in fact, actually a series of blog posts from Cloudflare indicating that they've been busy protecting some of their customers from denial of service attacks that are a result of DNS amplification. And so I just wanted to draw your attention to that. They have a pretty good description of DNS amplification attacks, the anatomy of it, and some specific examples. And I guess one of the things that I'll just make a mention of is that we at AT&T are in the process of devising some notification activities. That is, we've noticed that a number of customers have open DNS resolvers and are a source of some attack activity, so we want to make sure that those customers have the opportunity to correct that problem. And with our traditional pie chart here, it's looking at the top 10 most probed ports. I'll just walk through this through this clockwise here. And I'll just start with pointing out that the biggest category that we have in this particular report is there were actually 730 other ports that had been scanned. But top on the list in terms of individual reports that had been scanned, it's actually port 445 TCP. That's very typical for this report. And then a close follower, port 1433 TCP. That would be a Microsoft SQL database. And following that, we have port 16464 UDP, port 16471 UDP. Together, those are both associated with the peer-to-peer activity associated with command and control of that zero-access botnet that we've been reporting on several weeks. We had just talked about the next item, which is 3389 TCP, often scanned for remote desktop protocol, most often trying to do brute force or default password guessing. Similarly speaking, the next port is 5900 TCP, and that is virtual network computing, basically another brand of remote desktop capability. And then that's followed by port 22 and port 23 TCP. Those are SSH and Telnet, respectively. Again, usually doing password guessing attacks. And then, last of all, we have here the most sources probing. So whereas we were looking at the number of probes in the previous pie chart, this one is looking at the number of unique IP addresses that are doing that probing activity. Far and above the others is port 445 TCP, and this is, as we traditionally mentioned, it's basically latent configure infections that still exist on the Internet today, as well as a number of other botnets that are scanning for similar types of vulnerabilities. The peer-to-peer activity associated with the the zero-access botnet also shows up here. We'd mentioned next, which is port 23 TCP, 3389 TCP. Both of those we've mentioned as well. And then one that showed up here and is not traditionally in our discussions is port 6881, both in UDP and TCP. This is traditionally associated with the master nodes of BitTorrent, and I suspect that it is in fact peer-to-peer activity. I have not made a clear determination whether it's malicious or not. So it looked like there may have been some loose association with that security surveillance camera DVR botnet. And we traditionally, in the past, have seen port 210 show up on here, which was its peer-to-peer port previously. So I have a very loose suspicion that it might be related to that DVR botnet, but some further analysis will be necessary to confirm that. Okay, so that's our show for today. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at threattrack@list.att.com. We certainly welcome your comments on the program, questions, or even if you have corrections, something that maybe we said that was erroneous. We certainly welcome that. The video program is available at att.com/threattrack. It's also available on YouTube, and the audio version is available on iTunes as well as FeedBurner. So just search for ThreatTraq to find that. And thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Stan and John, for joining us today. I'm Brian Rexroad, and thank you, audience, for joining us as well. We'll be back next week with another, actually, I should say, we will not be back next week. Next week is the Thanksgiving week, so we will not be recording next week, but we'll certainly be back the following week. And until then, please keep your network safe.